Allow me to introduce myself. I am Michael Morbius.
Hi, I'm Shaky, and these are my tales of times forgotten. This is Shaky Subject Matter. Okay, Fizz, here's your goggles. Have fun out there. I know you've been waiting all winter to go out on your snowmobile, so be careful. Alright, see you later, bye. Alright, everybody. SHKE Radio is coming to you live from Studio 306 in Polo, Illinois, once again after a prolonged absence due to working too much. Alright, who would have thought I'd be working that much? Well, tonight's episode is a little different. I mean, if you want to know all about Michael Morbius and his powers and his comics, his appearances, where he's been, you can find about 50 million of those on the internet right now due to the film coming out. So, what I'm going to talk about here is Michael Morbius is one of my favorite Marvel characters. But we aren't going to talk about Michael Morbius. We're going to talk about what Michael Morbius did to expand my knowledge of the Marvel Universe and the comic book world at the same time. Okay. I started collecting comics in Chicago by going to... I remember the first comic, X-Men 161. I bought it at a Certified, which is a grocery store next to the Dime store on Irving Park in Chicago. Some of my people will know where that is. But I used to go in and buy them off the rack. You know, I didn't know too much. I was like 13, just wandering around the city. And then a little bit later on, we used to go to a store called... There was a grocery store in Chicago called Dominic's, and they had a big one about 1.5 miles away from the house, maybe, if that. And they had a huge magazine selection in this Dominic's. One of the biggest ones, bigger than a bookstore almost. It had the whole aisle with different magazines and comics. And, I walked right by the DC comics because they just didn't look right to me because of the way they were being... The art had started changing already back then when I started. John Byrne was coming in and stuff, but there's a certain style that I liked, and it was more or less the Marvel style. So, I go in there and I remember I bought the last issue of Ghost Rider there, and I bought this Daredevil with Wolverine in it. It's kind of a famous cover now. He's holding up the guy and he says, "I am Wolverine." And then I also got some X-Men comics there and other stuff. So I used to go to a YMCA in Chicago where they had different youth sports during the week and stuff. So sometimes I'd walk and sometimes I'd take a bus, whatever. But it was in the spring of probably 1984, I'd say. It was either late, I'm going to say 1984 spring. And I was walking home, and there was a store by the park called Yesterday Memories. And I looked in there. I said, wow, this is kind of neat. And what it was, it was a nostalgia store. And I guess it was one of the more popular ones in Chicago. I'm not really sure about that, but I do know that at one time when Michael Jackson was on tour, he stopped in there to buy some stuff from the store. He made a special trip there undercover. So anyway, back to this Yesterday Memories. I walked in the place and I looked, and there's the ZZ Top keychains, the rock and roll memorabilia, they had this picture of Andre the Giant with his forehead cut all bloody with an autograph on it, and wrestling magazines and old newspapers. And then I looked over at the... they had a comic book rack over there. So I looked at it, and I picked up this Adventure into Fear with a yellow cover with this guy on it wearing a disco suit. You know my affinity for Disco Draculas. I said, this is pretty cool. So I started looking through it, and I think there was a beast with like 1,000 eyes on it and stuff. And I looked, and there was a couple more. So I said, well, how much are these? And they were $0.10. So I picked them up, brought them home. No, I didn't bring them home. I brought them with me to the YMCA, because I must have been walking there, because the guy at the YMCA told me about the comic shop. And I said, comic shop? He said, yeah. So then, by me buying this Morbius, I learned that there was actual comic shops from this other guy. Okay? So we went to the comic shop, and it was the biggest comic shop in Chicago at the time. It was called Comic Kingdom. And the man who owned that store, his name was Joe Sardo, he started what is now the Wizard World Convention. All right? So he had this store packed with old comics, new comics, you know, the mixed media that had started coming out, you know, with the t-shirts and the pencil holders and all that stuff. So anyway, I started going there to get my comics now, because I knew there was a place. So to make a special trip, and this comic shop was right across the street from the Admiral Theater, which still stands to this day, which is a porn theater in Chicago, and right next to that was the Lemoore bookstore. So I'd take a bus and go down to Lawrence and Pulaski and go to the Comic Kingdom and buy 10-cent comics. I really liked that. So then, you know, we ended up moving out of Chicago, and, you know, there was comic book stores in the suburbs. It was called the Book and Video Annex. And I used to go there and look at, you know, it was mostly new comics then, because I really didn't understand the whole old new comics thing. But I did know that I liked the art in these old comics that I had, and it was different than the art I was starting to see. And I didn't understand what was going on with the art and the comic book industry at the time, but the big thing was Batman. So I started buying Batman because the Batman movie was coming out. I didn't really like it. Excuse me, I really didn't like it. It wasn't gravitating to me. I was more of, like I said, a Marvel fan. And I loved Spider-Man, but I didn't like his books. I like the X-Men. I like Wolverine. They started all these crossover events like Secret Wars and Secret this and Secret that and superpowers, and everything's got to have a crossover, and I started kind of waning away from it. Especially, they had this thing happen. I moved from the suburbs to the country in the 90s, or late 80s, early 90s, and I remember this thing they had. It was Operation Galactic Storm from Marvel. Everybody had a crossover in that book. So every issue, if you wanted to know the whole story, you had to get through everybody's issue or whatever. And I'm like, this is dumb. I don't care about these Kree and Skrull or whatever. And then they had one where they released bi-weekly all summer for Captain America, and it was this thing with Captain America and werewolves, and he turned into this werewolf that kind of growled, talk to people. I'm like, this is getting garbage, you know. And then I heard about this guy in Mount Morris that had some comics. And I said, hey, you want to meet up? I want to take a look at your stuff. His name was Terry. So I went over and I looked at his collection. He goes, I go, you got anything with this Morbius guy in it? He's like, oh yeah, I got lots of stuff with Morbius. I was like, lots of stuff? What are you talking about? It was then that I learned, because this was before the internet, man. We didn't know. I didn't know. I just know you look at the Overstreet price guide, and it came with this card in there that you tried to fumble around and figure out the grades of comics with, the White Owl card, whatever. But anyway, he's like, yeah, here, check this out. He pulls out this Peter Parker with this cool cover with Morbius's eyes and this one screen. And I'm like, what is this? He's like, oh yeah, it started in here. I'm like, he's like, oh, did you ever see Man-Thing? He told me about, did you ever see Man-Thing? He said, I'm like, no, what's that? And he showed me. He's like, I'm like looking at this big giant monster guy, and he's like, oh yeah, and these guys were in this book called Legion of Monsters together with Ghost Rider and the Werewolf. I'm like, what is this? What are you talking about? And you know, by this time, Tomb of Dracula disappeared, so that wasn't around, and the monster comics weren't really popular. So I started buying this old stuff. And then I went to a convention and started looking around, and I looked up, and there's this beautiful painting of Morbius. To this day, I think it's my favorite cover ever. He's tied onto a altar, and they're getting ready to sacrifice or stab him in the heart with a big knife, and he's laying there. And if you look on the cover, just look right on the end of it, the rope is just about ready to break. And it's so much action drawn in that picture, and you could just see him ripping it and going at it. And that's another thing about Morbius. He was more of a hero than a villain, which he started out as a villain, but I don't care about that. I just like the way he looked. And these magazines, okay? These magazines with these painted covers on them. You open them up, they're all black and white, but the art is fabulous. I mean, it looks like regular people. You know, nowadays you pick up a comic, you open it up, and it's just like anime people or half drawn, no backgrounds, nothing. These guys, these old guys, took the background and then they drew the skeleton and they imagined the skeleton and the muscles, and then they layered everything on it and made it look awesome. Awesome stuff. Gore, nudity, all that kind of stuff in these magazines. And I'm like, what are these magazines? You know, it's like an onion. You start peeling back the layers on this. And then the new Morbius series has come out. And I looked at it. I bought a couple of issues. I said, this is not good. So I continued to start buying the old stuff at this point. And at this point is about 12 years ago. And I had a huge collection of this stuff. And I was getting ready to move. And I said, well, I can't really keep carrying all this stuff around with me. So I sold it all. I wish I wouldn't have done that, but I did. And now I was tooling around on the internet. And I just looked up Morbius. And then this big book came up. It's called the Morbius Omnibus. And it has the Adventure into Fear that I bought years ago and a bunch of Morbius stories, including the magazine ones, up until the newer one, I guess. And man, it is fantastic. Like I said, this wasn't about Michael Morbius. It's about Michael Morbius, but it's not. It's just telling you how Michael Morbius opened the doors to my comic collecting world before the internet, and it was just, he's pretty much my favorite character, and that's just what I wanted to say about it. I said there's a lot of stuff out there besides Batman and Superman, and the old stuff needs to be looked at. I mean, now he has a major motion picture coming out this summer, or fall, or sometime this year. There's supposed to be the Michael Morbius movie with Jared Leto playing Michael Morbius. I don't know how they're going to pull it off with the costume, but hopefully it's like Blade with a little darker edge on things. Well, here comes Fez. Alright, Fez, slow it down. Just remember, watch or look at some Bronze Age comics when you get a chance. And let me know if you get a chance what you think. Fez, will you slow down with that thing? You're not supposed to be driving it in the garage anyway. You know, we got a lot of stuff to get in here. Very highly collectible Morbius statues and such. Would you slow down over there? Man, I don't know if this stimulus was such a good idea. Was a good idea with all this snowmobile Fez. I mean, who ever heard of a Carpathian snowmobile rider before, right, guys? Alright, well, I gotta go help Fez park. Will you park with Fez? That's it. Stop it. Good night. The preceding program was brought to you by
Tuesday Movie of the Week. Presenting the world premiere of an original motion picture produced especially for ABC. ABC presents Tuesday Movie of the Week.
John had it all. A band, a girlfriend, a plan for the future. But all that changed when a surprise from last summer showed up at his doorstep.
I can't take you anymore. You never understand anything. You heard me say that! I'll say it 1,000 more times because it's true! Everything! The homework, the anxiety, I can't do it anymore!
Rich, Demi Lovato, and Billie Eilish making her film debut star in Emo Dad.